thanks to all of this afternoon speakers for some fantastic talks. Lots of questions coming up in the Slido. Please keep them coming. The link to that is in the chat. On our panel, we've got a mixture of some of the people you've heard from this afternoon. So that's Liz Varga from UCL, Daniel Coker from Sheffield, Brian from STFC, Tom Gowland from STFC, who you heard this morning, and then a number of other members of the Daphne Governance Board. So these are the academics in UK universities who've been steering the delivery of the Daphne system by STFC, and also have Daphne hardware and outposts within their own universities to maximize the use of Daphne. So let me welcome, in that context, Nick Lomax from the University of Leeds, Nigel Cassidy from University of Birmingham, Theo Tryphonas from University of Bristol, Stephen Hallett from Cranfield University, Julian Haru from University of Manchester, Simon Blaney from the University of Southampton. So we've got a very strong team there to answer a very interesting set of questions. I'm not sure whether we're going to be able to hear from everyone on the panel, and I'm going to dive into the questions straight away. Scanning through them, there's a whole series of questions on digital twins, which I'd like to handle first. There's some questions on more from a civil engineering perspective, both around old assets and around model validation, which I'll come to. There's a couple of questions on ontologies, which I'll pass over to Liz. And there are a couple of questions on based actually on what we've just heard from David Wallam about physical climate risk modeling, which I'll invite David to respond to. But keep them coming, and I'll be able to respond to what's in the chat. By the way, in the Slido, there are quite a lot of specific questions and requests, which we'll try and make sure that we pick up on, or we direct them towards the relevant people so that they can respond directly. But to kick things off around digital twins, and I think I'll try and group a series of questions together. There's the question from Holger Keisler, which is top of the list here. I mean, in a way, it's possibly a more general question even than digital twins, but it's it relates to how Daphne and possibly the UK more broadly can compete with the tech giants, and that also relates to a question from one of the anonymous people on the Slido, relating to, well, what is the added value of Daphne for digital twins? I think I'll take those two, maybe direct those towards Daniel, but other members of the panel might wish to put their hands up if they want to chip in on that, and then we'll come back to another couple of questions on digital twins. But Daniel, responses to those.
So in response to the first one, I guess can we should compete with the likes of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft? I think this is a very valid question, because we know that they've, this huge tech giants, that these tech giants have stolen a march on technology in this area. Now, personally, I think that they operate on a commercial basis largely, and I look at what happens in the US now. I think last year in June, leading university and major technology companies agreed to back a new project in US that will give academics and scientists access to computer resources that are available now to tech giants. And this is the initiative called the National Research Cloud. And it looks like it's got traction in the House and Senate there. So basically they propose to create a task force to outline a plan to create and fund a national research cloud. And I think that's something that happens in the US. I think we should think carefully and also consider that, well, Daphne, it's in some sense an emerging platform that competes with some of the services offered by Google, Amazon, and Azure. But clearly, if we want to make this happen, there will be a lot more investment needed. So yeah, I think that idea of creating a national research cloud, this is something that probably Research Council should consider. But yeah, I think it's difficult to compete with the existing infrastructure that's fully put in place by the likes of Google and Microsoft. So probably a cage answer from me. I'm not quite sure.
And Daniel or anyone else, do you have remarks about the added value of Daphne in this space?
Well, Daphne is being created to serve the science research, so it's got a very, very clear focus. And well, the other hand, we all use Google cloud services for occasional machine learning and so on outside the university resources. I think that what Daphne has to offer is, first of all, it's connecting the community of researchers around a common goal, and also developing the tools that, apart from just being a cloud service, is the software platform, the tools that are developed by researchers and they will be made available to other researchers. I think that ecosystem, I think, is worth having, and certainly we should fight for it.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Still on the theme of digital twins, and maybe I'll direct these towards Liz. There's a question again from someone else who's anonymous on the Slido about the link between digital twins and BIM, building information modeling, and also about the link between Daphne and CDBB and the National Digital Twin Program, which I actually explained briefly this morning, but let's go back to that. Can you handle those, Liz?
Yes, of course, yeah. So I think BIM is an absolutely useful resource for building on in order to create digital twins, because these are the digital copies of the plans for new buildings. And these are the ones that we need to move into the operational environment so that digital twins can then extend. So BIMs are largely static models. They're a description of the as-built, if you like, but they are often different from the actual as-built. So BIM provides an opportunity to to ingest how the building was planned at outset, so that it avoids a lot of work in the creation of the digital twin. So I think digital twins are different because they'll understand the dynamics, they'll need to be much more accurate, so the focus on precision and on relevance is going to be much more important. I think 3D Repo has also done a very nice report on this, so if anyone has not seen it, then do collect it. I'll share that with Marion if others need to have access to it. And then on the Daphne CDBB side, so my colleagues there, particularly on the information management framework, so people like Matthew West, Chris Partridge, who've been developing, doing various work on the information management pathways and on the top level ontologies, and also industrial classifications. These are very relevant to the work that I presented in terms of taking forward Daphne and the integration piece. And we definitely want to build on that and embrace that, remembering that national infrastructure is a special category of the built environment, so we might want to tailor it. And actually that brings me back to the question you posed at the end on the digital twins. This whole idea of diversifying our digital twins is absolutely where Daphne has its major strength. So the way that we've managed to Dockerize and containerize models from different platforms means that we can now do this for digital twins built on different platforms. So actually what we do is embrace the diversity of platforms. So if you have Microsoft for one digital twin, you have Google for another, we should be able to integrate them because we've used this mechanism. I mean, Brian can tell you more on the technical angle on this, but I think Daphne presents a host of opportunities for taking digital twins forward.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Liz. And I agree that there is this very constructive relationship between Daphne and the National Digital Twin Programme, because CDBP has done great work in building the community and the standards, and Daphne provides the platform on which to do it. It provides the implementation and the pilots and case studies. Moving on, actually to one final question, though we may come back to it in the digital twin space, was a very interesting question from Diego Souza Monteiro, apologies for the pronunciation there, around democratization of data, which was actually something which Ottoline Laser mentioned this morning, and the extent to which Daphne can be used for democratization, and possibly more broadly, how digital twins might be democratized rather than becoming the inaccessible preserve of an elite. Simon, you've done a lot of work with, this is Simon Blaney from the University of Southampton, has done a lot of work with passenger data, transport data, which is very widely used by people all over the country. Have you got any thoughts on this democratization question?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So there's kind of a dichotomy in the rail industry between data that is publicly available and data that isn't. I mean, I think the question for Daphne is whether Daphne is the right organization to be taking the lead on democratization, or whether that's got to come from the industry. And I kind of feel if the data is there, then Daphne is the right place to share it. But I don't know how much of a role we can have as Daphne in trying to force that democratization through. At least from a rail side of things, there is a lot of concern around commercial confidentiality, and whether that will change as we move to Great British Railways, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I've answered the question fully. I mean, I think it's important, but I don't know if we're necessarily the right people to be pushing it necessarily.
Though one of the things you've managed to do, perhaps you could say a few words about this, is kind of collecting up some of these data feeds and at least putting them in a more accessible way for researchers using Daphne.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, there's been some work. I mean, I can't take too much credit for that. I mean, I think we suggested Daphne should do it, but it was using other people's code. But there's been work bringing together various timetable feeds on Daphne in a format which allows them to be used in a lot of open source modeling software, which wasn't necessarily centrally available before. Perhaps if by democratization we mean making data which is already open source more easy to use, then Daphne can play a role in that, and that is something that we've done with the timetable data, or at least Daphne has done. But for me as a researcher, I think that the bigger issue is perhaps some of those data sets that aren't yet in the public domain, and I think there's an opportunity for us to apply pressure, perhaps by showing some of the benefits that you can get from making data which is already public domain but hard to use more broadly usable, we could perhaps use that as then a route to say, well, look, if you make this data, which isn't yet publicly available, more widely available and also usable, you will get a further set of benefits on top of that. So I think there's maybe two separate issues. There's the issue around the data that is there but is difficult to use, and certainly Daphne is already making a difference there. And then there's also a further issue then on data which is not yet fully accessible. And we can help there, but there needs to be probably other people involved in that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Simon. Brian, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I mean, many years ago, I used to work quite a lot with the World Wide Web Consortium, and I think the analogy there is quite striking with the Digital Twin program. The way that the web was deliberately put together and evolved was around a set of open standards, developing standards, and that is the way that at least kept it, at least for quite a long time, it's not quite so now, a very open and dynamic space where people could enter that kind of market relatively easily. I think that the same sort of applies to here. We need open standards for data, open standards for the interfaces between things. And I think this is where CDBB and the information management framework, etc., are beginning to put those things forward, and the role there maybe for something like Daphne is as a reference place where those standards can be applied, sort of keep the feet to the fire for those big people, big players, keep them honest. Yeah, as a reference, and the other thing I would mention would be the use of fair data, the fair data principles, as a way of not necessarily making data open, but at least open about what it means and how you use it, and keeping it usable going forward. So trying to keep it in a state where it can be used more broadly. I'm not quite sure of the role of sort of, say, the citizen scientist in this, which is perhaps what Ottoline was thinking of, but certainly we want an open ecosystem where companies big and small and as well as the citizen can operate in.
Great, thanks for that, Brian. Now we've in front of us, we can see this very good question around old structures, old bridges. There was something on the radio this morning about Highways England wanting to build them up with concrete, and earthworks, and how difficult these are to simulate, which indeed they are. I wonder whether Theo, Tryphonas and Bristol, whether you want to comment on that one. Maybe Nigel Pasty will want to comment on the earthworks question and simulating that.
Yeah, it's certainly not easy task to do when you're dealing with, in our case, we work with the Clifton Suspension Bridge Trust, and it's one of our test beds through our observatory, and also trying to link to Daphne through digital twins modeling. So, it's a 150-year-old infrastructure and presents its challenges, but I think the whole context of UCRI and the focal point of Daphne can provide both a hard infrastructure, if you like, the access to the capability that we need to develop, ideas, as well as the soft infrastructure, the community around it to be able to deal with the hard science problem. So we've made good steps in having models and instrumenting the bridge and taking data from there and linking it to models. And as I mentioned in the past in events, we'll plan to link all this to Daphne as we go along, especially now that we've got the opportunity through Rose to continue work in that sense. So yeah, certainly not easy, especially when we're looking at legacy structures, but I think we've got the right context, the right partnerships, the right infrastructure in place, and that's why it's exciting. And just to echo back on there is commercial capability available with different ends and different goals. And for us and what we want to do and what we want to understand, I think we've got access to the right capability, and it's great to be associated with that.
Great. Thanks for that, Theo. Nigel Casti from Birmingham. Maybe, Nigel, you want to comment on Colin Taylor's question around embedding validation in Daphne workflows as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think I do concur with Theo that it's going to be difficult to actually do an exact replicant of existing structures. But we saw in the talk previous, what is a digital twin? A digital twin includes all the nuances and the things that go wrong in a structure. And I think what we have got with digital twins, and Daphne is a perfect platform, is the ability to probabilistically determine situations as they move forward. So whereas with a BIM, to answer the BIM model question before, we are adding in, I'll use the word loosely, static data. We've got the ability to dynamically alter the BIM environment, the digital twin environment, and compare that to the data coming from the physical embedded sensors, which are in our real world. That's a very powerful tool that we don't have within infrastructure. And if you think of just a simple pipeline, how do we know where a pipe leaks and how do we know how much it is leaking? And we were working with Network Rail only recently where they still didn't even know where the majority of their drainage pipes are, never mind what they're made of, how big they are, and whether they leak or not. So the leap of faith that digital twins will provide us is that additional bit of information that we can test probabilistically and come up with better scenarios. And if you think about this in the long run, we are predicting potentially failure or weaknesses or deterioration in our assets. And if we can predict that well, then we know our assets better by our understanding of that. And I think that's the benefit of a digital twin linked to a very good database as well, which BIM is not. So we are trying to separate and evolve the whole of that digital landscape.
Great, thanks very much indeed for that, Nigel. I'm going to turn to Liz Varga now with a few of the questions in the Slido about ontologies. There's a question from Sophie Peachy about layers of granularity and choosing the most appropriate layer. There's a question from one of the anonymous participants on saying that there are apparently some synonyms within your ontologies and how you cope with that, and a question from Steve Ellis about the practical need for a standardization of object and attribute data and the extent to which your work on ontologies helps with that. Do you want to comment on any of those?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, so so Sophie's comment on the which ones you pick. Actually, we will have ontologies for example, if I pick one sector, say energy, we will have a domain ontology for energy. And in fact, there are already several out there to choose from. There will also be multiple application ontologies. There will be several sensor technology ontologies to pick from. So there are already well-defined ontologies. So you will need to pick something that is relevant for the thing that you're trying to achieve. So you pick, if your digital twin is trying to solve a particular use case, you'll select those bits out of the relevant ontologies that are already there. And in fact, in making the selection, you would either implicitly or explicitly pick a domain on a top level ontology. And this top level ontology is critical for the future integration, as I mentioned. So the answer is it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the digital twin. You'll pick from multiple ontologies possibly. The synonyms I find interesting. Yeah, so I mean, I fully embrace the diversity of things that we have in our real world systems, because we all call things by different names, yet we mean the same thing sometimes and sometimes not. So, I mean, I'm quite keen on having synonyms or like AKAs, like also known as, in an ontology. I can see where it could lead to confusion, where you might have the same thing appear more than once. So I think there needs to be an element of caution. And that really brings us to the last point, which is on standardization. Absolutely, there needs to be standardization and clarity on what is being described so that we can have semantic integrity across all our digital twins. But what we don't want to do is to stifle the evolution of these digital twins. We want to encourage innovation, novel ways of addressing problems and solving problems using that digital twin mentality of, you know, we're going to get right time data, we're going to have some possibly data science, probably models to inform the what should we do about this data that we're receiving. And we need that information to go back either through decision support systems, through humans in the loop, or we need some automation where it's a critical system. So yes, standardization is really important, but please let's not stifle innovation.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Liz. Sue James has been contributing to the Slido both this morning with a question around the need for a national planning system and data to support that, and then this afternoon with some observations around the proliferation of different mapping systems and the need for a national data mapping system. Some of this, I think, speaks to the role of the Geospatial Commission, but I'm going to pass to Stephen Hallett from Cranfield University to respond to these challenges about mapping.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and hello everyone. Yeah, no, I think Sue, you raise a very interesting point. There are many different mapping systems, and of course, both in the sort of GIS cadastral world and also in the sort of web presentation. We've talked a little about visualization and presentation. You know, Daphne have elected a particular mapping system to present the cartography, and the metadata sort of sits around that. There are, of course, many tools that allow us to migrate between the different systems, and I'm sure that as things mature over time, these tools will be sort of built in. But in effect, you know, we have to sort of have these tools available. And I think one of the points that was made just now is about the democratization of data, and it's such a good question. It's really very much about the way that we visualize and present the data. There isn't sort of one way of doing things, but we need to find the most appropriate way. But what we do need are tools that allow us to glue the different approaches together, so that we can take data in one form and transform it, and perhaps make it available as in a better visualization, particularly pertinent to a particular group of users that we're looking at. And maybe just one quick point there is that at the moment, the outputs of Daphne are very much presented on the web page, but it would be very interesting to look to a future where there are visualizations that actually we can run a model on a supercomputer and get the results presented in cartographic map form, you know, on a mobile device and so on. So I think, you know, there are ways we could see the evolution of the mapping going forward. Hopefully that gives some thoughts there.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Steve. I'm now going to turn in the few minutes that we've got left, and thanks for all of these questions. We won't be able to cover them all, but there's a series of questions related to the work that David Walham described, the UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment. And one from Robert Pinning, which is asking, well, what's the market failure here? In what ways is the current system of the financial sector using data actually not working? Another, I have my own views on that, but I'll hand over to David to have a shot at it. Another one from one of the anonymous participants around how the private sector might actually respond to this public sector initiative, in some senses a related question. And then a third question from another anonymous participant around where the data is coming from, and possibly a note of criticism about the actual usefulness of climate model data for providing the type of insights that the financial sector needs. So thoughts on those, David?
Okay, thank you, Jim. So to Robin's question first, so markets will readjust in response to climate change, won't they? Well, yes, but at the same time, do we want an uncontrolled response, or would we like to enable them to have the best value or the best quality data available that they can, so that they can make those decisions from a position of strength? One of the reasons why a public sector funded project can make an impact is because, of course, that we come into this from the pre-competitive or from the early stage part of this, rather than trying to approach each member of a particular part of the financial services industry independently. Our aim here is to provide tools and services that any one of these one of these industries can actually utilize in the longer term. It's about making sure that there is availability of information, availability of tools. And the market failure, I think I would suggest actually, is that at the moment you have huge replication. All of the different businesses in, say, insurance, reinsurance, or are already, for example, working together. So we have things like the Lighthill Risk Network and other types of specific industry bodies that we are engaging with through the UK CGFI. So they are working together, but the market failure, I suppose I'd say, is that replication. And it's also the fact that there are very well-known statutory requirements on various parts of the FSI. For example, around solvency. Anyone that's been involved in UK academia will, of course, know that our pension is in deep trouble at the moment. And there are huge arguments about how the pension, the USS pension, for example, is going to get out of its deficit situation. If we pile climate change risks on top of that, you could see valuations being hugely adversely affected. And from that point of view, we will see that actually there is great benefit seen by the different participants in FSI in actually coming on board with this type of activity. I think Jim would agree with me. I don't think we had a single person that we asked to get involved with the project when we were putting it together that actually said, no, we're not interested. You saw from my slide where I talked about the consortium that we've got, that we've brought together a huge number of participants, and particularly when we think about things like the different types of industry bodies that represent large numbers of individual members of the businesses of the industry together. They're all on board here. So from that point of view, there is a willingness and a drive to understand that they need to understand how the different types of risk from climate change, be that transition, be that physical, or be that litigation, how that's actually going to affect their business. And getting cutting edge research to also be part of this means that they come to it from a position of strength. And that's the most important thing.
Great, thanks very much indeed for that, David. I must apologize for not being able to pose every question in the chat. Once again, we'll look at them carefully after this meeting and respond to them. Some of them are specific for specific individuals and are comments rather than questions, but we've managed to get through quite a lot of them. Also, thanks to our panelists and apologies to those who we haven't had time to hear from.